So this portion of our second unit is going to cover early American cultures. And what we're really talking about is early plains cultures in and around Oklahoma. And so this is going to include tribes and people like we've seen in the Kiowa tribe that live in the plains, like in South Dakota, but are eventually going to move to Oklahoma and become a part of Oklahoma's culture eventually through many, many years of government um, kind of relationships. It's gonna slowly bring a lot of these plains tribes to Oklahoma, which is why we're going to spend some time looking at them. And hopefully, what this will do will allow us to look at the different types of people that live in Oklahoma that have lived here for a really long time. So, about 10,000 years ago, um, the first humans are going to get to North and South America. And how do they get eventually to Oklahoma is going to be really important and kind of showing us that people move around a lot during this time. So the question is, how do they get here and how do they eventually get to Oklahoma? Well, the first is that they go across the Bering Strait between Alaska, what's today Alaska, and Russia. One thing I want to make sure that is distinct, and I would like for you to write it down, is that this is not a bridge of ice. This is a land bridge. These are connected pieces of land that weather apart through the water in the Bering Strait. So it's a land bridge. It's not an ice bridge. Okay, it's a land bridge. All right. So eventually they're going to just move, right? We're talking 10,000 years ago. So we're talking, you know, thousands of years before Columbus, tens of thousands of years before Columbus. And they're going to move from Asia through North America, following food largely into Central, North, South America. And they're going to do this. These groups of people are going to do this in order to survive. And they're going to adapt and evolve and make their ability to survive is going to be based on whether or not they can find food. So, Oklahoma, the end of the last great ice age, Oklahoma's climate was a lot more mild, more rain, less heat. This is going to allow for the plains that we are a part of, the Great Plains, to thrive in Oklahoma and in the surrounding area. In our prehistoric times, and really still today, the thing that civilization is based on is the ability to eat and to drink so that you can live. And these civilizations, these prehistoric civilizations around the end of the last great ice age, are going to move with their food and with their water. And where there is food and where there is water, there's where people are going to be. There were many different types of animals that lived in Oklahoma at the end of the last great ice age, okay, including mammoths, very large buffalo. And how do we know this? Well, we know this through fossil remains, both fossils that we have found in Oklahoma, bones that archaeologists have dug up that have resembled mammoths. And this shows us that the climate, or this confirms to us that the climate during this prehistoric time period was much more mild, and then it eventually changes, and the types of animals that live in Oklahoma change as well. So there are two main groups that live in Oklahoma during this early prehistoric time from about 10,000 BC to about 8,000 BC. And the first group is the Clovis people, and the Clovis people are going to be the first group of people that will live in Oklahoma, and then they'll be replaced by the Folsom people. And both the Clovis and the Folsom are hunter gatherers. They move around with their food, and they are going to move around a bunch. So the Clovis people are seen to be in um, both New Mexico and Oklahoma, as well as other parts around this regions, the Panhandle of Texas and other places. And the Folsom people are going to be these hunter-gatherer groups that are going to move north and south between Texas and Oklahoma. And so there are really two things that we want to know or remember about these two groups of people. Is that one is that they have they're very nomadic. Like we saw with the Kiowa, these groups of people are very nomadic. So we have archaeological arrowheads. So archaeologists have done digs that have found arrowheads that are very similar, both in central Texas near Austin today and in southwest Oklahoma. Which, if you've ever driven between Austin and then Dallas to Oklahoma, is a really far distance. And so these groups of people move around a bunch and they follow their food and they use these arrowheads to hunt, and they are not very close to one another. Um, and so this tells us that they're pretty nomadic. The second thing is that we want to remember is that we don't really know when each group of people begin and which people end, and that their culture and that when they kind of pop up and become a distinct group is very different. And it's not really known when one ends and one begins. This is similar to what we're talking about on our discussion about the Kiowa, is that they have similar language to the Pueblo, and we correctly identified that could mean that they were with the Pueblo. But we don't really know when they separated from the Pueblo and moved to South Dakota and have their origins, in western Montana as a group of people with a similar language to some groups of people that are thousands of miles away. We don't really know when that ends and when that begins, but with the Clovis and the Folsom people in Oklahoma, we don't really know when they technically became the Clovis people and when they technically became the Folsom people. It's really fluid. But we have these two, long periods of time where, the 2,000 years between 8,000 or 10,000 and 8,000 BC, where we have two main groups of people that archaeologists have found and anthropologists have found about the Clovis and the Folsom people. Eventually, that will become many more different Native American tribes that live on the plains. But in that early 8,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 8,000 BC time period, it's these two groups of people that occupy the land in Oklahoma.